Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hiltwine, and I work with the CRCF team here at CIT. Today's webinar topic is the application process. I'll walk through the components of the online application and then cover tips for preparing strong proposals. We'll wrap up this session with an opportunity for Q&A. This is the final live session with this focus. But like with CRCF webinars, the presentation is being recorded and will be made available to view on CIT's website. Today's presentation does not cover CRCF project budgets, but that session, which will be the final live webinar of this round, will be held tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. Before we get started, if this is your first time participating in a CRCF webinar, all participants have been placed on mute to avoid background noise. Questions may be submitted at any time during or following the prepared remarks. To do so, expand your webinar control panel and type your questions using the questions feature. I'll answer any questions that come through during the allowed Q&A time. The goal of CRCF is to fund high potential technologies or services from Commonwealth organizations to spur economic development across the state. Over the last 4 years, CRCF has invested $16.5 million in nearly 200 projects from the private sector, academia, and other research organizations. This round, $3.4 million is available to award through 5 programs. Across all 5 programs this round, project work must primarily align with one of 5 technology sectors: cybersecurity, energy, data analytics, life sciences, and unmanned systems for air, ground, sea, or space. This primary industry sector was identified during your LOI. Within your application, you'll have the option to select a relevant secondary industry sector from an expanded list of priorities. Here's a quick snapshot of key dates for FY16. The next upcoming deadline is Monday, February the 1st at noon, when applications are due. Award announcements are planned for early June 2016, and projects may start at the earliest on June the 16th. All materials that you will require to submit an FY16 application can be found online from the solicitation webpage, which is the URL that's currently on your screen. From this, you'll find general resources like FAQs and webinars. By clicking on the hyperlinks to the programs, you'll find the meat of what you need for the application, the guidelines, and proposal and budget templates. A sample application is also available. You'll see an example on a following slide, and is meant to guide you in the questions on the online application form. As with the letter of intent, applications must be completed and submitted online. Hard copies or soft copies attached via email will not be accepted nor processed. Importantly, so I want to call this out first and foremost, each program has specific templates for the proposal and budget. From the individual program pages, there's a document window at the top right-hand corner. This is where you can find and download the templates for this round. Please use these current templates. If you're familiar with CRCF and have prepared applications during a prior round, please don't resubmit the materials. Changes are made each year to the templates, and we expect submissions in the FY16 round to use the FY16 templates. Submissions that do not use the correct templates will not be accepted. Every application begins with an online questionnaire, which I'll go through with you shortly. The proposal and budget, along with the appendix, are documents that are required as uploads into every application. The guidelines for each program outline the required content for the proposal. You must refer to the guidelines for the information sought for CRCF. Again, this information may be tweaked from prior rounds, so consult this year's materials. The budget template has 2 tabs, and both need to be completed. The budget-specific webinar will walk you through that process and the details that are needed. If your project will run more than a year, email my team at crcf@cit.org for a multi-year template. The appendix is the last component required of all applicants, regardless of program. There is not a template for this section, but required content varies by program. Again, refer to those guidelines for what information should be included. Typical content includes the letter from the organization's authorized representative, required for all, additional letters of support, which are optional, from external supporters, CVs, bibliography or references, if you're including them, and more. All appendices must be within the allowable page limits. Information that is included but falls outside of the page limit will not be reviewed. It is acceptable to combine information into a single page, such as multiple letters of support, if space is an issue, provided that all information is still legible. Applicants under the SBIR or STTR Matching Funds Program must also provide their official notice of award for the Phase 1 or 2 project. If you're providing the contract, we only need the signed first page. In the case that you are applying to CRCF with a federal proposal submitted in calendar year 15 or to be submitted for a January 31st deadline, we request that you upload into this field a PDF document that includes the submission deadline date, the sponsoring agency, whether the proposal is a Phase 1 or Phase 2, the project title, and the estimated date of award announcement. Should a CRCF award be recommended, funding is contingent upon receipt of the federal award. The following 2 slides show examples of the fields on the online application. All applications are similar, with the exception of a couple of fields. This particular example is for the commercialization program. I'd like to draw your attention to the principal investigator section. If the authorized representative and the principal investigator are the same individual, you can indicate this by selecting Yes at the first question, and you'll not have to fill in the remaining fields in this section. A reminder that the authorized representative is the individual authorized to execute legal documents on behalf of the applicant organization. In the case of universities, this would be an individual from the Office of Sponsored Programs and should not be the PI or someone such as the department chair. The remaining application fields can be seen on this slide. You'll notice certain fields are pre-populated based on your LOI and are not modifiable, such as the CIT reference number, program type, project title, and primary industry sector. If there is something incorrect with any of this information, please let the CRCF team know right away. The CIT reference number was assigned at the time your LOI was converted into a program application. It's an internal identification system developed to identify the program the project was submitted under and its industry sector. This is the reference number that will be used to identify your project moving forward. As you'll be instructed in the guidelines, this number should be used in the file name for all uploaded documents. Applications may be worked on and modified until they are submitted, but once submitted, modifications are not possible. Once you are ready to submit, click Submit on the final page of the application. A confirmation will appear on your screen, and an automatically generated email will be sent to you confirming receipt by CIT. It may take a little while for the online system to release the notification, but if you don't receive it within several hours after submission, contact the CRCF team. As I mentioned, you do not have to start and finish the application in a single sitting. On the final review screen, next to the option to submit, you can Save Only. To be considered for funding this round, applications must be submitted before noon on Monday, February the 1st. The link to access your application is found within the instructions email received when your LOI was approved and converted into a program application. If you do not have this email, please let our team know immediately. The screenshot here is of a commercialization program proposal template. As I've mentioned, templates do vary by program, so you'll want to download and use the ones specific to the program you're submitting under. On the template, you'll see prompts to enter text here. Click in that space and either type or paste content. The top section, which mimics information requested in the online form, is required. Please do not delete this or leave it blank. Page limits for each section of the proposal and the document as a whole can be found within the guidelines and in the template itself. Please be mindful of these limits, as information outside of the maximum allowed pages will not be considered. The maximum allowed pages is outside of the top section information, so if you're looking at page numbers, content may appear at the top of a 7th page. Additionally, a page break has been included between the technical discussion and strategic plan, and for the SBIR and STTR matching funds programs, also between the strategic plan and the commercialization plan. It's okay for these sections to start on a clean and separate page of the template. All uploaded materials should be in final form without track changes or internal comments. Proposals should be uploaded into the online application in PDF form. All uploaded materials should be saved with the nomenclature described in the guidelines. In this table, you'll see the 5 programs offered during this round, the required proposal sections, and specific comments. For instance, as we just saw on the commercialization program proposal template, a financial table is a required element for our private sector applicants. These tables are brief and ask for such information as revenue and the status of the company being cash flow positive. Additionally, though importantly, while a separate commercialization plan is not required for all programs, CRCF places emphasis on the commercialization element for all programs, and this should be addressed within the proposals. CRCF is routinely asked what makes good and strong proposals. The tips on the slides, and that will be discussed, are not a guarantee of a CRCF award, but are meant to aid applicants in preparing their most successful proposals. Sample proposals or winning proposals are not made available. The purpose of the CRCF program is to fund projects focused on technology development with the end goal of commercialization. The strongest proposals that we've received identify an unmet need or opportunity and spend the majority of the allowed space describing the CRCF project, its competitive advantage, and validation of why the technology is superior, especially if it's in a crowded market. There is a need for a small amount of background information, but the focus of each submission should be the project work. Each program has a specific set of guidelines that describe content that should be included and the format that it should be in. Applications must be submitted in accordance with these guidelines. This year, we will not be reaching back out to applicants to get information not initially provided. Applicants should use the allowable space wisely for the most effective proposals. This includes text size, the use and value of images and tables, and content such as background information that's included. This year, we've allowed applicants additional page count for their proposal than in previous years. CRCF proposals should demonstrate why CRCF funding is critical to the advancement of the technology. Additionally, it should discuss other funding sought. Applicants should have a well-thought-out approach to specific funding opportunities. Applicants should discuss plan for commercialization, which is the ultimate goal of CRCF funding. What's next for the project or team to get to the commercialization goal? What are the commercialization outcomes? How will Virginia benefit from funding the project? These are some things to consider as you're preparing your proposal. Reviewers are also looking for a demonstration of the team's capabilities and qualifications. The CV of the principal investigator, as well as the co-PI or another key personnel, is requested in the appendix. If partners are involved, discuss expertise and their involvement. For projects that may be resubmissions from prior rounds or follow-on projects to already funded work, submissions must show work that has been accomplished in the interim since the previous submission or award to continue advancing the technology. In the case of a resubmission, address concerns raised and shared by reviewers of the previous submission. For all submissions, write clearly and use the current program-specific templates as we've discussed already. Overall, there should be consistency throughout the proposal and budget, such that information included in the budget or budget narrative should map to the work plan and key personnel, as an example. Once submitted, each application goes through a 4-step review process, beginning with CIT, who will review each submission for compliance with the guidelines. Then, applications progress to subject matter experts who review and rank submissions. Next, applications go to the RTAC, a 10-member body established in legislation to review and make award recommendations. Those projects that the RTAC recommends for funding are sent to CIT's Board of Directors, who make final award decisions. For this solicitation, award announcements are planned for early June. Complete information on the FY16 solicitation is available via the URL on your screen and that you've seen throughout the presentation. Here you'll find an FAQs document that addresses many common questions about CRCF. This document was updated in early January with a couple of new Q&As, which can be easily denoted in the content. Also, via this link, you'll find a sample project budget and links to register for or view webinars offered this round. A final reminder that the last live webinar will be hosted tomorrow, January the 20th at 2 p.m. and will focus on the budget and budget narrative and include a discussion on matching funds. As I mentioned at the beginning, this session, like those held in December, is being recorded. It will be available by the end of the week to view from the URL just mentioned. Later this afternoon, the slides from this presentation will also be made available. If at any time throughout the solicitation you have questions, my team can be reached at crcf@cit.org. This concludes the prepared portion of the webinar. I'd now like to invite any questions that you may have. Questions can be submitted by expanding the webinar control panel and using the questions option. I'll address questions in the order they come in to the best of my ability for the benefit of all participants. If a question requires more information, I'll follow up with that individual separately at the conclusion of the session. And we have a couple of questions that came through during the presentation, so I'll start with those and encourage any other questions that you may have at this time to be submitted. So how many letters of intent were accepted by CIT for this round of SBIR and STTR matching funds? So any particular organization could have submitted up to 2 letters of intent, but we have not released the total number of LOIs that were received this round. In terms of the percentage of proposals that were funded last year, we received about nearly 100 proposals and funded almost 40. Of that, I'm not sure of the particular breakdown for SBIR or STTR, but I can certainly get you that information. So we have a question about handling references, and yes, any bibliography or references that you would like to include with your proposal should be included in the appendix, and that would count towards the maximum allowed pages for the appendix. So we have a great question about the PI and the authorized representative. For our small businesses, the PI and that authorized representative may be the same individual. That's something that we see commonly throughout CRCF with our companies. So yes, if you are maybe the CEO of your small business or co-founder and also the person conducting the project, it would be reasonable for you to be one and the same individuals. As we were walking through the presentation and we were talking about the application, you'll recall that there was a section that you can identify that you are the same. We do this so that you don't have to enter all of your same contact information twice. The call out about the AR and the PI being separate is really for our university participants, as they have a little bit of a different process of the people who are qualified to make those financial and other decisions on behalf of the organization. So we have a question about the proposal template, which we may have addressed as we were talking about how to move forward with that. But yes, there is a top section of each of the proposal templates that asks for information such as the CIT reference number, the project start date and end date, the PI's name, some of that type of stuff. We ask that you do complete that information, even though it's identical to what you would have plugged into the application. This really helps with our review process to keep things in one place. So thank you very much in advance for filling out that information again. When it comes to the page limits for the remainder of the proposal, the half page for the executive summary and the page count for the technical discussion as a whole, that would be whatever follows that top section. So we'll use your judgment in terms of what equates about a half of a page for the executive summary. Again, page numbers are included at the bottom, but we certainly understand that we're taking up a bit of your page space by asking for that top information. So if your proposal is a 6-page proposal, we understand if there is content on the top of the 7th page. So again, use that judgment as you're preparing your proposal. So we have a question about needing all team members' CVs, and the answer is no. The guidelines for each program stipulate something a little bit differently. So for instance, for our matching funds programs, primarily for our universities or our research organizations, we may ask for the principal investigator CV along with a co-PI or another key personnel. For our private sector, that shifts a little bit. We would ask for the principal investigator CV, but also information such as the CEO's CV or the CVs of external advisors to the company or additional executives such as a CFO or a chief scientific officer. So if you take a look at those specific program guidelines and flip to the section for appendix, it will lay out exactly what CVs are required for which program. So past award statistics available on the website. So I guess in a very simple answer, they are there, but they're not laid out probably the way that you may be thinking. Each year, CIT prepares an annual report on the CRCF program, which is submitted to the General Assembly and the administration, showing the value of the funding, the amount of funds that have been leveraged based on the state's dollars, and some early outcomes that we've seen from our CRCF award recipients. So that document is made available each fall, and certainly you can look back at past documents to see what the different statistics look like. But in terms of overall stats, that isn't really made available or isn't presently available, though we do have it. So if there's something in particular that you're looking for, please reach out to crcf@cit.org and we may be able to pull that information for you. A great question about whether there's a minimum page limit. If you are able to concisely state the project that you're seeking funding for and explain all of the sort of required content that's stated in the guidelines, we welcome you to do that in 3 pages. What we've heard in the past is that it's often been tough to do it in 5 pages, which was our previous limit in prior rounds. So this year we did allow the extra page count to be able to be respectful of the reviewer's time, but also to get all of the information that may be required. So there's a maximum, but there is no minimum. Just a heads up that you would want to make sure you're sort of checking the boxes of all of the required content that's laid out in the guidelines. So the link to submit a full proposal was included in the instruction email that was sent to you when your LOI was converted to the application. The subject line of those emails reads instructions for submitting an FY16 application, and it was automatically generated again when that LOI was approved and converted to the program application. If you think you did not receive that, if you could send an email to crcf@cit.org and include either the request ID, which was about a 7-digit number from your LOI, or the project title or some other defining information, we'll be able to pull that up and make sure that you receive a copy of that automatic email. At a very high level, anyone who was approved to submit an application, if you log back into the online grant system that you submitted the LOI, you'll now see that there's a link that says continue next to the project title that you submitted in your LOI, and that's how you would go back in and complete that application. Essentially, the LOI turns into that program application, but that instruction email gives the specific steps to doing so. Are any reports to CIT required after the CRCF project is completed? Yes. So in our FAQs document, this year we have included a section at the very end about what happens once an award is made. We expect that a lot of you are thinking forward into what would be expected. At a very high level, about 2 reports are required during the project's period of performance. I'll use a period of performance of 12 months as that's our most standard. And about halfway through that, you would be required to submit a progress report talking about the steps that have been completed towards the project, any challenges that you've encountered, what milestones have been hit, things like that. That progress report does include a budget where we ask for you to detail the amount that has been spent so far. If matching funds are required for your particular program, then we would ask to see that as well in that budget. At that point, we would release the second tranche of funds for your award. If it's a $50,000 project, almost always we will distribute about 60% of that at the time the award is made, and the final 40% would be authorized for disbursement at the time of the progress report. A final report is required on the project 45 days after the period of performance ends. That's going to be your general final report for any funded projects that talks about what was accomplished, what steps are remaining towards commercialization, what the team's next steps include, what the final expended funds were for the project. And we provide all of the templates and all of the information that you need for any of the reports. The last piece is a commercialization report, and that's required annually for 5 years after the project concludes. It's a 1-page bulleted update that you would send to us about things like IP or funding that's been received, or the number of folks that have been hired to your company or brought on board to help advance the project. Anything that shows really those outcomes of CRCF funding. And it's from these reports, the progress, the final, and the commercialization, that we get the content that will go in our annual report that I mentioned earlier up to the General Assembly and Administration. And certainly, I mentioned that that information is in the FAQs, but if there are any specific questions about reporting or the award process, let me know via crcf@cit.org, and I'd be glad to discuss that further. how long are CRCF funds good for once awarded? So the question has multiple layers, and essentially we ask that within 60 days of the award announcement that we have all the necessary materials from you to be able to disperse funds. For most of our project, this includes basic information like banking instructions. We provide you with the reporting information. You send us a signed terms and conditions that you're agreeing to the conditions of a CRCF award, and we're able to authorize the disbursement of funds. So that's within 60 days. On a very rare basis, and exceptions are made, for instance, if it takes additional time to secure a licensing agreement, if you are working with a partner on a project, and there are a couple of other extenuating circumstances that we would work with you on a case-by-case basis, but everything would be needed so that funds could be dispersed and projects to be started within 60 days of the award. Most projects I had mentioned earlier are about 12 months. That doesn't mean that there can't be projects that are longer or shorter depending on what you're setting out to do. But those funds would be good through the duration of your project. If there are any unexpended funds at the end, those would need to be returned to CRCF. So how are the panel of experts selected, and are they business and university? So our subject matter experts come from anywhere and everywhere. The purpose of the letters of intent, not only do they help us to judge the number of proposals that we may receive in any given round, but they also give us a head start at identifying experts that will help us to work with any particular project that comes through. So the first part of our review, as you'll recall, is CIT's compliance review. So my team will go through each project or each application that is received and make sure that it aligns with the content required in the guidelines, that it's using the correct templates, that it's in the right format, those administrative qualifications. That second round is the subject matter expert, so someone who can speak technically to the science behind the project. So based on the project descriptions that were provided at the LOI, our team has been working to identify people who can really understand what will be presented. And those can come from universities, they can come from businesses, they may be venture capital groups who work in a particular industry, and they could come from all across the United States, so it's not limited to Virginia. We are very cautious of conflicts of interest, so we will not assign a subject matter expert that's going to come from the same university, for example. And we also are very mindful of competitors and people who may be interested in a similar technology. So we do our due diligence in trying to identify the people to review the proposals on that subject matter level. Again, with this and any other questions that I've addressed so far, if that doesn't completely answer your question, I'm happy to provide more information. Just send me a note at crcf@cit.org. So for the commercialization program, what should be the focus of the strategic plan? And I will push that back to the guidelines. So in our commercialization program guidelines on excuse me, page 7, we list out what the strategic plan should address at a minimum. And this is included in all program guidelines. So matching funds, SBIR matching funds, everything. So we are really looking for anything that is bulleted out in those guidelines should be included in your strategic plan. If you have a specific question, please don't hesitate to reach out with that. If a prior CRCF award has been made to the PI for a separate project, does that place the application at a disadvantage? And it does not. So it is an equal opportunity for anyone who is brand new to CRCF or someone who is a prior award recipient or even just an applicant. If you are a prior award recipient and you are submitting a follow-on project, we would look for this new submission to detail what has been accomplished in the prior project, what steps have been taken since that funding was received, anything that helps the reviewers to know that this additional funding is going to build on something that's already been successful, or to help fund a new area of that particular project that wasn't addressed before. In the case that you were a prior applicant but did not receive an award, again, if you're applying with the same project, we would look for you to be able to address the concerns that were raised and shared by the reviewers in your letter that you received, as well as to detail what steps have been taken since that time. For most of you, that may be a year or more that's lapsed since you may have submitted the last time. Were any activities taking place that would help to advance the technology, and if so, to describe that. Finally, in the case that, again, that this is an award recipient that we've seen before, we would take under consideration things like whether reports were submitted on time, whether the project was successful. Some of those administrative things would come into play if there was a question about the technology. So all of those things are on the table, but not a disadvantage. So explaining how CIT and CRCF safeguards company IP and what we recommend that you include in your application, and it's a great question. So to begin with, anything that comes through to CIT is shared with our external reviewers for the sole process of evaluating your proposal. So if there is anything that is proprietary that needs to be included in the appendix and marked as such, your information is not going to be published or put out there in any sense of the word. So what you share with us remains with CIT and CRCF for the sole purpose of evaluating your proposal. Information that comes in from applicants who may be participants of the Mach 37 program, or perhaps the CIT Gap Funds program, that information may be shared. So if that is something that you do not want shared among CIT's different funding vehicles, you would need to let us know that. But we do not put forth any of that information publicly. And in terms of what you recommend, or what we recommend that you include in your proposal, we are looking for the status of IP for the project. So for example, do you have a patent application submitted and are waiting for that final decision? Are you licensing the technology from a university to a small business here in the state or in another state? We are really looking for what steps are being taken to move the technology from the lab to the marketplace, that whole commercialization path. So any information that you can provide regarding the status of intellectual property for the technology would be helpful in assessing the project. So where do we discuss work with consultation with or in collaboration with Virginia entities? If you are working with another organization on the project, the work plan would certainly be an appropriate place to talk about the steps that are going to be taken, the activities that will be worked on in order to accomplish the overall CRCF goal. That work plan may talk about whether it's your organization that works on particular tasks or whether it's that of a partner company, or if you're using a consultant for particular information, detailing where they fall in your work plan and why that work's important towards advancing the overall technology would be a perfect place. We also, let's see, under the key personnel section of the technical discussion, that may be another place where you can talk about the people who are involved, whether they're receiving funds or whether they may be providing the match for part of the project. The location of some of the information isn't as important as the fact that it would be included. So I say this with a grain of salt, but if you have something that you want to put forward, such as talking about the role of a consultant in advancing the technology, if it's not exactly in the right place within the proposal, that's not as important as the fact that you're sharing that information with us. But as you go through the guidelines, there should be some obvious places where some of those details would be included. For anyone who may have incorrect information in their LOI that needs to be changed, this may be a principal investigator, an industry sector that was not listed correctly. If there is anything like that, please shoot a quick email to crcf@cit.org and indicate your CIT reference number and the change that needs to be made, along with just a really quick description of why that change needs to be made. We do not need any personal references as part of the required components of the CRCF application, but we do see a lot of letters of support come through. If you are working with a partner company or maybe it's a manufacturer or a legislative representative, any of those letters of support can be included as part of your appendix. And again, there's a maximum allowable page for the appendix. Letters of support may be combined, shrunk to fit 2 to a page. As long as it's legible, that would be acceptable. So that's really the only type of reference, excuse me, that would be required. So not personal references aren't needed. We have a question about involvement with out-of-state people. So if those folks are receiving CRCF funds, I'll use the example that you may be working with a manufacturing company that might be located in North Carolina. If that's the case and that manufacturing company is receiving a portion of the CRCF funds to do their part of the project, we would need justification as to why the out-of-state company is needed. Maybe they're the experts or they're the only ones doing that kind of work. Maybe you have an already established relationship with that group. Whatever the case may be, if those funds are going to an outside source, being able to provide justification about that is going to be critical. And I say that because the CRCF program as a whole is really looking for those economic benefits to happen here in the state. So we're providing funds to state organizations with the hopes that the eventual commercialization is going to happen here, that the jobs are going to be created here, companies are going to grow here. It would be great the manufacturing would happen here. So really seeing that return on the state's investment here in Virginia. So if anything is out of state, just being able to identify why you're choosing to work with that organization instead of maybe a similar group that's based in Virginia would be a great thing to include. So we have a follow-up question about using out-of-state consultants. If you are using an out-of-state consultant, that is okay. They may be contributing a very specific element to the CRCF project. So by all means, don't take my comments in that you cannot use an out-of-state consultant. My point was that if you do, we'll just ask that you justify why that particular individual or organization has been identified as the proper channel for CRCF. What do they bring to the project that perhaps an in-state organization can't or doesn't? Again, those can be things about previous relationships or specific expertise. So if you're using an out-of-state consultant in your proposal and in your budget narrative, if funds are being requested for that out-of-state consultant, just to justify that cost. Actual team members who may be out of state, it's the same process. So if they're receiving CRCF funds, just identifying the fact that they are out of state. But the excuse me, the majority of the CRCF project work should be conducted here in Virginia by the CRCF applicant. I really want to thank everyone for their participation today. You guys have been a really great group to have on today's session. Thank you for the great questions, and we really look forward to receiving your applications in just a little under 2 weeks. So thanks again, everyone, and with that, we'll close today's session. Have a great afternoon.